Vanaka and good evening. The Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission has been given a mammoth task of monitoring compliance and also facilitating fair and competitive trade for the benefit of both consumers and traders alike. Given the number of changes that were announced in the 2020-2021 national budget, the FCCC's role in providing these services to Fijians is of critical importance. Tonight, we are joined by Mr. Joel Abraham, FCCC's CEO, for our discussions. Well, Vanaka, and welcome to the show, sir.
Well, thank you, Geraldine.
So before we get into what we'll be discussing later on the show, this is our first time having you on after the budget was discussed and was announced to everyone in the country. What are your thoughts on it so far?
Well, the national budget, as I saw it, Geraldine, was quite a bold budget. There were discussions of what the government will do, what they're intending to do, given that revenue is declining. Not just Fiji, the entire planet is in a state of economic downturn, and because when economic downturn hits, it means a hit on government revenue, because government revenue is dependent on economic activity, and when government revenue declines, you've got to supplement it somehow. So going in, there were expectations that there will be certain increases in taxes, government will try and cover for the shortfall, but the government has continued its to build on its budget as it has been doing in the previous years. So if you look at previous budget deliveries, it's always been people-centric, and while there were certain expectations that taxes will go up because you need government to function and you need revenue for that as well, what government has said, no, we will continue with our people-centric and will ensure that the people get a good deal, and amongst other things, the major tax and tariff reforms, FCCC receiving some powers as a result of the duty reductions and tax exemptions and reductions that have been passed, but also a lot of initiatives. As the one that sticks out for me is the first homeowner package, $30,000 it's increased, a lot of incentives rolling out, critical ministries receiving funding, targeted expenditure. So, I mean, it's easy to look at it and say, look, you know, we need the revenue. I think it's and that's why it's bold, because the government has really come and said we will make sure we take care of our people, and I think it's good news, a plus point for consumers.
Of course, this means that there's going to be a lot more expendable income for those ordinary Fijians that weren't able to afford certain luxuries that were afforded as luxuries before. But as you mentioned, there were powers that were afforded to the FCCC, and that would mean that there have been amendments made to the FCCC Act 2010. If we could get into it, what are the main changes that have been implemented? So
there's been an amendment of the FCCC Act by putting in a section 53A. Now, this section basically is empowering FCCC to ensure that when duty and taxes are reduced, the price to the end consumer reflects such a change. So the benefits must flow on. Now, previously what we found is, and we look at 2015 when there was an amendment to the Customs Act of 1986, they put in a section called 137E that gave them some similar powers. Now, FCCC has got the enforcement capability, we've got ground teams, and a lot of these things require verification. So if there is a reduction in duty by say 20% or 27%, that does not mean that the retail price will reduce by 27%. Now, simply because one has to understand that in pricing a product, there are multiple variables that are involved. One, you have to have the cost. Cost is the purchase price. So a company from Fiji, say take for example Max Value, wants to buy jam, right? Let's take that as an example. Places an order with their supplier, right, in Australia, in New Zealand, and the supplier prepares, packs the jam. So the purchase price is the first component. The second component is of course going to be freight. You get the jam on a boat in a container over to Fiji. So freight component. Then when it comes to Fiji, you got to go to a customs agent, you got to get the container or the consignment cleared. Now, it is only when the consignment is cleared, then there is a duty that's imposed, and that component has reduced. Then from there, there's charges by the ports for handling the container, for clearing it, for fumigation, making sure no pest and other biosecurity hazards enter Fiji. From there, they load it on top of a truck or a container and get it into their warehouse. Now, from the warehouse, the boxes are taken out, it's dispatched into the bulk. The inventory guy takes record of it, and then from there, once the shelves are empty, it hits the shelves. So it's a cycle, there's a product cycle. Right? So when the duty reduces here by 27%, there are other costs that remain constant, right? And so there will not be a like-to-like change, one. Two, the change won't be immediate, simply because it has to do with the supply chain or the cycle of the product. So what we do at FCCC is to ensure we know when the products are going to change. We calculate what we call an inventory turnover ratio. So I can tell you, okay, gem in max value based on the previous consumption patterns, that it will finish by a certain number of times. Say for potatoes, the turnover is 2 weeks in Fiji. So you get a consignment in, the same trader after 2 weeks will come back to FCCC and say, I'm lodging another submission because I've been able to sell it. FCCC takes the purchase quantity and reconciles it with the sales quantity and say, okay, fine, it's all been sold. So a new price can be given. But that's for regulated products. Now, here we're talking about 1,670 or so categories. Now, let me break this down. So, you take one item, right? Let's take, say, exercise books, which is code number 4820.20.00. Now, that says exercise book. But when FCCC does the verification process is as such. So, we go and we look at things like how many types of exercise books are there. So you've got the METS 4C book, right? And people will remember that. You've got the METS 4C book, you've got the 12 mm ruled, you've got the unruled ones, you've got ones with thinner lines, you've got ones with thicker lines, then you've got the 1B4 books, then you've got the 1B5 books, then you've got 1B4 in 60 pages, 48 pages, 100 pages. You've got the 1B5s also in 100 pages, 150 pages, 200 pages. Then you have lecture page, etc., etc. So the different products under a category, and then each of these products has its own brands, right? So you've got the Viti brand book, you've got the Oxford books, etc., etc. And then you've got the number of traders. So say previously we've seen about give or take the 60 traders that would sell books, right? Stationery. Now I'm talking about the Central Eastern Division, right? So when there's a back to school sale, we approximately run enforcement activities. We find there's approximately, sometimes it changes, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Now let's take, for example, hypothetically that there's 20 different products. Okay. By 60 traders, that's 1,200 individual verifications already, right? Now leave the brand aside. Now imagine if there's 5 brands, or say there's only 2 brands in the market, that number doubles to 2,400. So you're talking about one tariff line item that requires 2,400 individual verifications, and the FCCC won't go and publish something until and unless we verified it and we know that it's correct. And so the task is mammoth. And yesterday we put out an advertisement. We've put some price lists on our website. I've got a copy of what we had put out. We've seen changes in certain items, like you look at things like vinegar, reduced by 47%. Now, what's happening is there are traders who are taking different approaches of passing reductions, right? Now, some are saying, I'll wait and I'll drop the price after I've sold my old stock. Some are saying, I'll do a weighted average, so there'll be a gradual decline. And FCCC needs to get in to make sure that what these traders are doing is correct, that the benefit gets passed down. Now, that is the intention. So what we've done is we've divided the work into 3 phases. We've said phase 1 is going to be a stakeholder engagement phase. Phase 2 will entail verification, and phase 3 will entail enforcement.
If you could just put a pin in that, and we'll be back with more after this break.
Sure.
Ms. Abraham, we were talking about compliance and monitoring and how the FCCC, of course, has such a huge task ahead of them. And you did mention that there are 3 different phases that will be implemented. You just briefly mentioned them earlier on in the previous segment. If you could get into it now.
Sure. So, Geraldine, there's many ways to skin a cat. The FCCC is looking at the intention behind the policy. The intention behind the policy is we want to spur consumption. We want people to be able to go out and spend. The idea is, and if you follow the Fijian government's budget address, when you see the minister speak, they say leave no one behind, you know. So, I mean, whether you're focusing on things like white goods, like a washing machine, you know, why should only you and I be entitled to a washing machine? Why shouldn't Sarita in the village have a washing machine, or Mere in the village be entitled to use a washing machine? And the whole point behind, or the whole intention behind it, is to ensure that the benefits are realized. Now, we can go one of 2 ways, and I have said this immediately after this, after the announcements made in the budget. I said, either the businesses do it willingly, or the FCCC will help them do it. Now,
So not by force of hand, this is in negotiations with them, giving them some leeway.
yes, well, you can construe the word help, you know, in many different ways. Our first approach has always been the collaborative approach. Not to say FCCC can't come down hard on enforcement and say, look, here's the fine, here's the fine, here's the fine. But when the FCCC goes around imposing fines, Geraldine, it means that there is some problem in the market. We believe in a proactive approach to ensure there is no problem in the market. And so what we do is, myself, my GM operations, my managers, they've been going around, we've been holding stakeholder engagements. This last week I was in Nindi, speaking to the Nindi Chamber of Commerce, while my GM was here in Suva speaking to the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, one of their councils. At the same time, I had my managers having one-to-one meetings with different businesses and stakeholders. So, as part of our stakeholder engagement, I was down in Nindi talking to the Nindi Chamber of Commerce, and while my GM was here in Suva talking to the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, one of their councils, my managers were having one-to-one meetings, and these were happening simultaneously. Now, so far we've met over 50 traders individually. I addressed about 100 different businesses in the Nindi Chamber of Commerce. And so the whole idea of phase 1 is to get into stakeholder engagement. What we want is, we want the system to work. Fines will mean that the system has failed to work, and as such we've had to intervene and force people's hand to make sure that it happens. We want this to happen naturally, organically. So we want to set in a culture of compliance, so that not just now, whenever there is a duty reduction, and whenever there is a change in policy, and the intention behind the policy is that it must reach the people, the fact is it must be realized across the supply chain. And that is what we want, right? If the system doesn't work, then it means FCCC will have to go out, investigate, and that's why we've left enforcement. We've not written enforcement off, we've said it will come as part of phase 3. We are now currently getting the action plan from various traders. We're getting the copy of the inventory, how much is in their warehouse, how much is not. So, see, I have many different lists like this. So this one is for Eskom Motors. Out of born and inborn stock, how many do they have? So I probably can tell you that they have 1.57 seater SUVs. Rush, I can tell you the model number, F8800 RE, what is the price and how many do they have, to the point of what is their tank capacity, what is the engine rating, what is the model code, what are the colors. So if you just take one example, right? Let's look at Toyota Yaris, right? Model code NSP150R AEXRX3B, which is basically a 1.3 liter petrol auto sedan. Mid-spec, engine capacity 1298, fuel tank capacity of 42 liters, pre-budget 44,500, post-budget $38,060, which is a reduction of $6,440. Now the other thing we have to understand is, because there is a reduction in percentages, you will see a greater dollar value of more expensive things. So you'll say, oh, by the way, Yaris has reduced by $6,000, but vinegar in the supermarket won't reduce by $6,000 because it never used to cost that much. So one example is a Topps vinegar brown, 1 liter used to cost $4.75, now costs $2.50. Or whether you're talking about things like pipes, 40 mm PVC plain elbow, which used to cost 95 cents, is now 70 cents. Now there's a 25-cent difference. But if you look at, say, 100 mm PVC Y junction, we used to cost $8.35, now it's $6.50. That's a difference of $1.85. So the difference will be felt in dollar value, different stages depending on the price of the product. So the more expensive it was, the more reductions you're likely to see in terms of dollar value. Percentage wise is going to be similar. And so usually FCCC looks at items which previously have been regulated. That has always been our focus. But here we have to not only look at regulated items, but even things like salwar kameez, that used to have, or underwears, vests, bras, panties, things like that. We have to now go in and ensure that the price reductions are indeed being passed down.
So with that in mind, Mr. Abraham, because it is a lot that you need to cover, and of course we are geographically challenged as it is in Fiji, it becomes, it compounds the problem of having to monitor compliance. With that in mind, you've also noted in the last month that you've seen businesses being more compliant. This is voluntary compliance measures. Do you think that this should be something that the FCCC should be looking to make, to standardize, to tell them to become more voluntary compliant, as in to come up and provide you with information?
Yes, so what we are doing is, we've set in, from 2016 onwards, we rolled out the voluntary compliance framework sometimes in 2017. Now the voluntary compliance framework basically means we are allowing businesses to, as the name suggests, voluntarily comply. So right from the top, the directors of the company have to say, look, my company believes in protecting consumers and protecting consumer rights, and we will ensure that we will have all the necessary steps put in our business processes to make sure that we protect consumers. Now that doesn't mean that there will be zero violations in the market, right? Or zero breaches. These things may happen, but now the voluntary compliance framework allows for it to be resolved at one store level, and it's not to say that if it's resolved there, FCCC does not know about it. There's a mandatory reporting requirement. If you've received 10 complaints, we'll solve 10 complaints, and you need to tell us, by the way, I received 10 complaints and I've solved them. So the discussions that we'll be having with them, why were there 10 complaints in the first place? What are the nature of complaints? How can we make sure that these complaints don't arise in the future? The whole idea is to have a culture of compliance in Fiji. So it's a general change that we are trying to advocate. Now, post-COVID, we saw, pre-COVID and post-COVID, we saw some changes. The compliance levels were high. During lockdowns, it went down, and then it came back higher. As of last week, there's about 97% compliance in the market, which is a good thing. It shows that businesses want to comply, to the point where we had stakeholders reach out to us and say, look, we want to reduce our prices, we want to make sure that this gets passed down, we will be running sales. If you just go past Roops, you see they put up a massive sign, budget reduction sale. You've got RB Patel advertising the same thing. You've got other businesses putting in to say, look, this is specific to duty reductions or change in taxes. You've got companies like McDonald's, Burger King, Tapu's that have come on board and contacted FCCC and said, we will voluntarily comply. The CEO for McDonald's called me. He said, look, I would not only like to comply this time, but would also like to have quarterly meetings with the FCCC to ensure that we are very compliant. Now that shows a culture of compliance. That is a shift from when people used to be afraid of the FCCC. We've got instances now, Geraldine, where a very prominent business called us and said, oh, we've made an error in our system and we've charged this customer this much, what should we do? And we gave them we said, you need to provide the redress, you need to refund the consumer, you need to put out proper signages to make sure this doesn't get repeated, and that's what's happening. The business is calling FCCC, calling the regulator and saying, look, I think I've made a mistake, I've messed up, how can I fix it? And so the culture is changing, and we want businesses to be compliant, because it's bad business for you not to be compliant. customers are very important, consumers are important, every Fijian is important. FCCC advocates on that, FCCC believes in that, I personally believe in that. I owe a duty of care to every Fijian, and I want businesses to be as equally passionate as the FCCC is about consumers. So don't rip them off,
We'll be back with more after this break. Welcome back. Mr. Abraham, if you were to look at other fiscal measures and also other incentives that have been put in place due to the new budget, it also means that there's a lot more to cover, not just the duty reduction.
Yes.
There's, of course, there's 6% service turnover tax that has been removed. There's been stamp duty removal. There's been changes to ECAL. And, of course, with the service industry being mainly affected by this, do you see that the workload that FCCC is currently under is going to get doubled, maybe tripled?
Yeah, I mean, during COVID itself, Geraldine, the number of complaints we're receiving increased fourfold. And that's just our job, So whether there's one complaint coming in or 10 complaints coming in, I am very fortunate to have a very vibrant team at FCCC who believe in consumer protection and protecting the rights of Fijians as much as I do. For us, it's about passion, right? And our teams, I was out yesterday, our teams were out yesterday, in the weekdays, in the afternoons, even when they are out and about in their personal capacity, they still, we've got a staff Viber group, they'll send in and say, whoever is closest, can you please attend to this? So our people don't see it as they don't see it as work. We see it as something that we ought to do. We are very passionate about what we do. And yes, the numbers are increasing, but the team is responding equally. We are also looking at, so we had a ground team, we had a special budget during the COVID response, and we were able to set up ground teams. And we are fortunate that the Fijian government has also allocated a budget, a special budget for monitoring of duty and tax reduction. And so what we've done is we've continued with the ground teams, and because they are there, it means that it takes a lot of workload on the staff in the head office or in the Lotokal Namas office. Now you've got people in towns and cities that are feeding information. But not only that, what we do is we work with, say, the Fiji Hotel and Tourism Association that then talks to its members and say, look, you need to bring this down. You need to take ownership and tell us. So you've got companies like, again, like McDonald's and Tapus, who are writing to us and saying, oh, I have done this. This is what we have done because STT and ECAL have reduced. Now, it is very good to see that the culture has changed, and it is very good to see that businesses are being forthright. At the same time, we also are cognizant of the fact that there will be people who will want to get by the system, will try and circumvent, will try and take advantage. My message to them is clear: please don't. And for businesses that are compliant, if you are doing the right thing, you don't need to worry. We are here to assist you, right? The goal is the consumer should get the benefit, and FCCC will do everything in its powers to make sure that that happens.
If we were to look at certain things that people might be looking to find redress on, say for example, if they have felt like they've been cheated out of certain things, or they feel like the service that they were provided with wasn't up to scratch even though they have paid, some might say, well, if there's a reduction, then of course you're not paying as much for premium quality service. For instances like that, then how do they come forth to the FCCC? How do you come forth to report that? Because of course it's not a product that you can come in and show.
So I'll answer it both for products and services. So what's happened is, because there is a reduction of STT and ECAL and other duties, yes, there's more expendable income for people, meaning you have to pay less, but that doesn't mean there should be any compromise on quality. So for product itself, the FCCC has, about 2 years ago, we've adopted what we call a price quality path. So when a trader comes in and makes a submission saying, I want to get this, I'll take an example of oil, cooking oil. So if a trader comes in and says, I want to get this particular brand of canola oil or soybean oil, we ask for everything from health certification to the specs of the product to testing to quality. So we make sure that the product is of quality. Cheap doesn't mean that you get low quality things. We are the rule that we use. If I'm not going to consume it myself, why should I allow for it to be on the shelf so other people can buy it? Simply that's what we advocate, right? We also say this to various traders and say, look, if you're not going to do it yourself, you're not going to use it yourself, then you shouldn't be selling it, It's simple. We believe in the principles of fairness and equality. Now, in terms of service, there's a particular section within the FCCC Act that covers both products and service, that nobody should accept payments for goods and services if they can't supply what was demanded. So if you can't supply it, then don't take the payment. Just be upfront and honest about it. And honesty goes a long way. And if people have issues, they can contact the FCCC. I mean, that's why we exist, because things like this may or will happen in the market. There will be a few that will do this. And we are there to ensure that doesn't happen now. Some pitfalls that people ought to be aware of, with the, say, reduction in price of some building materials, with the coupled with the policy initiative of first home builders, you get about 30,000 if your income is below 50,000. There'll be a lot of contractors, right, or carpenters. Please be wary of the people that you hire. Sometimes it's important to do your due diligence before, and do all the right checks and balances. Because an investment into something like a house is a big deal. I always say in Fiji, unfortunately, anyone that picks up a hammer can become a carpenter, So it's important that if you are going and refurbishing your house, or if you're going and building a new home, please engage a proper engineer, get a proper architect, get somebody that can tell you what the bill of quantities ought to be. If you can't pay for it, the Ministry of the Rural and Maritime, they have a list. They have approved plans for 2-bedroom wooden and concrete house, 3-bedroom wooden and concrete house. These are approved plans with the bill of quantities. So you can be sure that yes, these are standard homes. But if you have the capability, just to save a few $1,000s, and you don't want to pay the architect or the engineer, you will end up, if you get somebody who's done a shoddy job, you will end up having to spend 10 or 15,000 to correct whatever problems have been created. So make wise investments, get people to check, and people who have the necessary expertise to check. So building and construction, that's one of the pitfalls.
If we could just quickly go back to what we were discussing with tariff reductions on the 1,600 plus items, could we just get some clarifications on what type of items these are applicable on, because there's still some confusion between traders and also consumers on whether this is for all items across the board, whether it has been imported into the country before the 1st of August or not.
No, so as I explained earlier, Geraldine, duty is part of the cost when you look at the supply chain, one component of the cost. So you will only realize the reduction in duty once a good has been imported post 1st of August 2020. Anything that has been imported into the country, or anything that used to sit in the bonded warehouse that has been cleared post 1st August 2020, you will see the duty reduction in there. Now, say, take for example supermarkets that carry stock with an average turnover between 2 to 3 months, depending on the product. Now, that's why you will see the full benefits of the duty reductions in 2 to 3 months' time.
Not directly, just
not on 1st of August. Certain things you'll see the price of alcohol reducing, because the manner in which alcohol is produced is, once it's produced on the assembly line, once it's manufactured, it goes into the bonded warehouse, and then the company has to clear it and then sell it as part of their wholesale rate. So the impact is immediate, right? As opposed to say a car sitting in carpenters that it's already sitting in the showroom, that's been cleared on the previous duty rate. Now what will happen is, some businesses carry a very low volume of stock. Say if you're in the same market, right? take for example cars, because I've been getting a lot of questions about people wanting to buy cars. So let's talk about cars. So say there are 5 traders, right? And one trader carries 100 pieces, the other trader carries 20 pieces, the other trader carries 30 pieces, the other trader carries 50, and one carries only 5. Now the person that's carrying 5, after they've sold the 5, they can either bring the price down and sell it quickly and be the first mover into the market to get the prices down. Now once this person gets a new deal, or one of these 5 starts cutting prices, it puts what you call a competitive pressure or downward pressure on price. So the guy that's sitting with 100 pieces, if there's a price reduction in the market by one trader, the other has no other option but to reduce the price or lose out on business, and that is where competition comes in. And the minister, when making the budget address, talked a great deal about competition. Now in a competitive market, what happens is, if businesses are competing and competition is good, it is very good news for the consumer, because then you don't need FCCC to come in and set or regulate prices. What will happen is the market will self-correct. So if the 5th company drives the price down, or say the 3rd company drives the price down, the others, if they don't follow suit, they lose out on business, and so the competitive pressure will push the price down. But of course it is a process of market normalization, right? You have a curve, and the normalization will take time.
We'll be back with more after this break. Welcome back. Mr. Abraham, if we were to look at ease of business in the country, we've been ranked pretty well globally so far, and with all the measures that have been put in place, we are seeing that there's local stimulus and also local incentives for people to get into business if they weren't already in it. However, post-COVID, there have been certain drawbacks, certain contingency plans that they've had to reflect on or turn to, and this has made things harder for them. You mentioned that you and your team have met up with different Chamber of Commerces around the country, and you've come up with ideas in ways to help them with this. Talk to us about it.
So, I mean, to spur economic activity, one has to appreciate the fact that the private sector or businesses are important, right? It's not that there is a zero-sum equation where if businesses are important, consumers are less important. No. For any country, its people is the most important, including consumers and businesses. So the business community forms part of all Fijians. So when we say we are here for all Fijians, we mean businesses and consumers alike. Now, if you look at the FCCC Act, our objective says the FCCC must ensure consumer protection and equitable returns to businesses. So you have to balance it out. Now, our ease of doing business, if you look at how we place globally, we can always do better. And I think that is the idea, that we go and do better. There's a set criteria and there's a set framework that the World Bank utilizes, and based on that they rank different countries. And also it's done by way of sending questions to different businesses and the response that people give, right? And that also needs to then be clarified. Sometimes what happens is people put in the frustrations that they face. Now, what FCCC has done is, during COVID, we had rolled out what we called a business assistance program, and last week Friday I announced the continuation of the business assistance program. Now, the whole idea here is to remove regulatory red tapes, and it sounds quite strange coming from a regulator, right? Hardly you'll find a regulator saying let's do away with regulatory red tapes. We are saying that regulatory intervention should only be necessary if the market doesn't work. We want the markets to work. And if markets work well, Fijians are better off. So what we've done is we are going and meeting with businesses. I met with a businessman in Nindi last week, looked at his plans. He's looking at making a $10 to $15 million investment. Now, $10 to $15 million investment, Geraldine, will mean jobs, right? And he's trying to make that investment in Nindi. He's got his financing ready, he's got everything ready, and he's just going through the process of getting all the necessary approval. So if this project starts, what it will mean is a lot more jobs created, means the economy gets back on, there's a flow-on effect. So the flow-on effect simply is he announces this, gets a contractor, the contractor hires some laborers, the laborer then has to travel, pays the bus company pays its drivers, the driver goes and buys stuff for his children. So there's a multiply effect in the economy because as a result of economic activity being created. Now what also happens is in this environment you want businesses to invest, and when I spoke to this particular gentleman, he said, look, it is simply because of this budget I feel that it's conducive for me to invest. And making a $10 to $15 million investment is not an easy decision, So a very positive meeting, and not just him. I spoke to a few others, and there are people who are lining up to say, let's make investments. Now, if you look at the budget itself, we've done away with business licenses as a country, right? The removal of stamp duty. So there's a lot more liberalizing the business environment. Yes, we want people to do business with ease. But see, at the same time, we need to get a balance, right? I often hear there's a lot of discussion and debate, and everybody, has an opinion about what should be done. Now, my personal opinion is you need to look at it in a very fair and balanced way. While you want businesses to be at ease, you can't. You also need to ensure that there are it's done within a certain sandbox, right? Under certain.
So there's no gung-ho play going on.
Yes. So, for example, there's removal of business licenses, but if you are, say, a high-risk business engaged in, say, things like you're having a restaurant, of course, we don't want you to cut your fish on the floor, and make fish and chips. So there's certain health standards that you have to abide by. For that, you need to get the regulatory approvals, because you can't say, let's make business, let's get ease of business, but let's do away with all the requirements. No, there's certain things that are put in there for specific purposes. And again, laws are made by people for the people, and if the laws don't make sense, they need to change. And that's why overall the 2020 and 2021 budget was quite bold. I mean, we've done away with business license, I met this gentleman in Tabua, and he said, it took me about 2 months to get my license. I got it last week, and the requirement has gone away, so I'll carry my license around with me, although I don't need it, But he said, what a relief, I don't have to run around. And his words to me were, all the time I spent going and getting all these approvals, now I will spend doing my business, which means I can do more for my business, which is what we don't focus on. So when you remove requirements, when you remove regulatory red tape, when you've got regulators like the FCCC saying, we'll come to you as businesses, we'll make sure that you are able to do business without having to worry about somebody coming to just, interfere in your business, or that you don't get the approvals on time, administrative systems are not working. You'll find that more and more people will say, okay, I want to do business, I want to do this, I want to do that. And if you look at administrative decisions, I mean, even that's in our constitution, section 16 of our constitution says, talks about administrative decision making processes. So, and it's quite good. I find it more liberating. Even as a regulator, I believe in being more open, but I believe in fairness.
Before we quickly go to break, Mr. Abraham, if you were to just give us your opinion on what you foresee for Fiji for the next few years, given that the post-COVID fallout globally, the economic fallout of that is going to take some time, and of course with all of these measures in place, it is going to be stimulating local economic activity. What do you see this, what does it mean for Fiji for the next couple of years?
Well, definitely we've gone through some pretty bad times in the past, I mean, Winston was really bad. I personally traveled around the country to see how things were. I've seen when COVID hit, after the lockdowns were removed, I've traveled around Fiji. I've seen how things are. I've seen the difference, right? So you say you're in Suva, you don't feel it as much as you would feel it in Nindi. When you go to Lambasa, you feel like nothing's happened, because they purely rely on sugarcane and agriculture to stimulate the economy. Now you go to some islands, you probably won't feel it also. But if we go down to Nindi, I grew up in Nindi, so you go down to Nindi, you almost feel like it's the level of economic activity is declined, you know. And so I think more of a targeted approach in looking at our reliance on tourism. Two, I think the initiative of the business loans that was announced pre-budget, that is being administered by the Chamber of Commerce, I think that's very important. Because what it does, it allows people to look at different sources of income. The other thing that I would focus on, and not just for Fiji, but for Fijians, is we need to get into a culture of savings. What this has taught us is there will be global events, there will be things that's out of our control, and so you need to be prepared for rainy days. I read somewhere, I said, you know, if 2020 has taught us that nothing is in our hands, but you still got to wash your hands anyway, you know. So
We'll be back with more after this break. Welcome back, Mr. Abraham. This is our final segment, and the one thing that is on a lot of people's minds, but they haven't been able to voice it openly, is regarding the rent freeze. Now, it's still in place until the end of the year, and post-COVID, of course, there have been certain changes that you have been asking for tenants and landlords to discuss, because there's not much that can be done from a regulatory point. What does this mean, though, moving forward?
Yeah, I think one thing that needs to be appreciated is there is different areas and branches of law. You know, there's public law and there's private laws, there's private contracts. And if you look at the landlord and tenancy relationship, it is a result of a private contract between a landlord and a tenant. So the question is, to what extent do we go in and negotiate, or to what extent we go in and mediate? Now, what we've done is we've taken a approach of saying, when we get complaints, we'll review it on a case-by-case basis. Why? Because these variables are different, you know. There are some landlords who have investment properties that are paying banks, but now as a result of it, a result of the announcement by the Association of Banks, they're getting some deferments, so probably they're flexible. There are some landlords in Fiji that build flats in as part of their retirement plan, so their only source of income is coming from rentals. There are some tenants who have not been affected, who are on full pay. There are some on reduced hours. There are some who are not being paid at all. So different people are affected in different ways. Now, unfortunately, while there's a cultural problem, the culture is off. In Fiji, the problem is a lot of our people are not honest, you know. Especially when it comes to this type of situations, and whether it was doing the Velomani Food Bank, or whether it's going and resolving complaints on a day-to-day basis, or whether it's dealing with landlords and tenants, we find that people can generally be very creative with the truth, you know. Their versions of the stories can be very different. There are instances where people will say, look, I won't do anything, I won't pay. There was numerous instances where landlords have complained to say, look, my tenant is still employed, but they're saying because of COVID I won't pay my rent. And what do? I'm elderly, I'm 60 plus years old, and this is my only source of income. Then you've got cases where the number of lockout cases have increased. If I can just put it into perspective, say in the last year, last financial year, the entire year we saw only about 2 to 3 cases of forceful eviction, people, you know, locking tenants out. In 1 month alone, post-COVID, we saw 28 cases, and that's worrying. And the strategy utilized was wait till Friday and disconnect the power and disconnect the water, or wait for the tenant to leave and change the locks. Now, because it's a private contract, the FCCC has to go to the court to get this enforced. We have had cases previously. We've made interim applications. We've got the court to give an interim order to EFL directly to say, go and connect the power. Now, what happens in Fiji is, say, if you're renting in my property, the electricity and water bills are under my name. So EFL recognizes me as the customer. So when I go to EFL and I say disconnect my power, EFL doesn't know that you're using it. So EFL disconnects it. You've been paying your bills on time, but I'm the customer. I say disconnect my power and EFL disconnects it. So it's being used as a strategy, you know. And this is what I say, I've seen a lot more incidents of dishonesty and happening. You know, I'm not saying everybody is crooked in Fiji, but compared to last year, when you compare figures this year, you see a lot of these things happening, and there are instances where people trying to push people out. No, what one must realize is, if you push a tenant out now, where will you find somebody else who will come in? You know, so it's very sad to see some of these things happening, especially because I see it in real time. And one thing I've said is during COVID, I said this is not just a global pandemic or an economic crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis. It's testing our humanity. It's testing our resolve as people, and it's testing our spirits as Fijians. Please embrace our Fijian spirit and love one another, you know, and care for each other.
Before we get to our final question, just like to commend the FCCC and the work that they have done so far, especially in one particular instance where we had an FBC CSR initiative in helping out families in need post-COVID. The FCCC was quite helpful in helping out one of the families in finding a safe and secure shelter, because there was a case of a landlord and a tenancy issues that were coming up. But if you were to just quickly wrap this up, looking at the rent freeze, are there plans in place to continue it on a year-by-year basis, or is the FCCC looking to standardize and actually make this something that will be formalized?
Yeah, so I've said this previously. The idea is to phase out rent freeze because rent freeze was put in as a regulatory intervention in the market. Now, this rent freeze was there to ensure that you protect people from arbitrary or unilateral conduct and unilateral increases. The law surrounding the rental market is quite fragmented. You've got the Distress of Rent Act, you've got the Fair Rents Act, you've got sections within the FCCC Act, you've got sections in property law, you've got sections within the health. So if the condition of the building is not good, you go to the health. If it's rent increase, you come to FCCC. If the rent is not fair, or, you know, or if the rent is not being paid on time, is the Distress of Rent Act. If you're talking about termination, it's under property law. So, I mean, it's all fragmented. Now, FCCC over the last so many years has worked on a legislation. The idea is to put it in a bill format, send it to Parliament. Although consultations, when we had the initial rounds of consultations, rather disappointing. Suvarnasori corridor, 3 rounds of consultations, 8 people only turned up. There's one particular day I sat for 4 hours at Rishikul, Rishikul College in Nasinu. Nobody turned up. Given that there's so many people that rent between the Suvarnasori corridor, would have anticipated a higher number. I remember the first round that we did, they said, why are you doing it in the day? Nobody's at, you guys should be more aware that people are working in the day. You should do it at night. So we did it at night, still nobody turned up, we get a lot more complaints than submissions, but it's important that people come out and voice their opinions on what they want to go in the law, because that's their time to make comments, that's their time to make submissions. And when they don't make submissions, your voice is left out. And the FCCC will ensure fairness, so we worked on that. The idea is to phase out rent freeze. Maybe we'll look at something, maybe an alternative. Right now, I would not like to speculate what will happen because we arrived to a decision of whether the rent freeze should continue or should be revoked or amended is based on a market study. So the team will go out and from September, every year we do a market study to say, let us see whether there is a need to continue. And if there is a need to continue, then what we'll do is we'll make a recommendation to have it extended. If we see there's a need to amend it or to revoke it or to alter it, we'll make those recommendations as well. So It's a catch-22 situation, you know. You want the landlords to invest and do the upkeep of the property, but you also don't want unilateral increases that will drive tenants out and push the rentals high that it becomes unaffordable. So really one needs to balance it, and FCCC is there to ensure that we find the right balance.
Well, we look forward to something favorable very soon, and thank you very much for your time. That wraps up our show for tonight. Vinaka for joining us, and until next time, Nisam Modemanda.